Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Ketubot. We are up to Perek Yud Mishnah Vav. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilu Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Ranbai Veliyahu ben Burcha Israelo ben Chana bat Miriam Menuchatam began Eden Amen. And Avdir ben Chaim Nechaim v'derefua shelemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa betoch Shachol Israel. The Mishnah discusses another case of a man who has two wives and not enough property to pay both of their Ketubot. If someone was married to two wives and sold his field, which was worth only enough to pay one of their Ketubot, and the first wife, meaning the one he married first, wrote to the buyer of the field, I will have no legal claim or argument with you about this field, and will not take it from you as payment for the Ketubah, because normally, if a man sells property then dies, his wife has the right to take that property as payment for Ketubah, as we learned in chapter 9, Mishnah 8. This wife, however, gave up that right, and then the husband died. The law is that the second wife can take the field from the buyer, and then the first wife can take it away from the second wife, since her right to the field came first. And then the buyer can take it from the first wife, since she gave up her rights with respect to him. And they keep going around in a circle. The second wife takes it again from the buyer, the first wife takes it from the second wife, the buyer takes it from the first wife, and so on, until they make a compromise among themselves. For example, each one agrees to take a third of the field. Now they do not actually need to continue taking the field from each other. The Mishnah means that because none of them will be able to keep the field anyway, they should come to a compromise. The Mishnah gives another situation where this can happen, and so too is the law with the lender. For example, someone owed a lender 100 zuz and had two fields, each worth 50 zuz. He sold one field to one person, later sold the other field to another person, and the lender wrote to the second buyer that he would not take that field from him. The lender can seize the first buyer's field as payment for his debt. Then the first buyer can take the second buyer's field as compensation for his loss. The first buyer should be compensated by the seller for losing his field, but the seller has no more property. Instead, the first buyer can take the field that was sold to the second buyer, since his right to compensation took effect before the second buyer bought the field. The lender can then take that field from the first buyer as payment for the rest of the money is owed. The lender was owed 100 zuz and each field is worth only 50 zuz. Therefore, he has the right to take both fields. The second buyer can then take it back from the lender, since the lender said he would not take his field, and it goes around in circles until they reach a compromise. And the third situation where this can happen, and so too this is the law with the woman who is a lender, in the sense that her husband owes her ketubah to her. For example, her ketubah is worth 200 zuz, and her husband had two fields, each worth 100 zuz. He sold one field to one person, later sold the other field to another person, and the woman wrote to the second buyer that she would not take his field as payment for her ketubah. When the husband dies, the woman can seize the first buyer's field as her payment. Then the first buyer can take the second buyer's field. The woman can take that field from the first buyer as payment for the rest of her ketubah, and the second buyer can take that field back from the woman, and it goes around in circles until they reach a compromise. And that is an Rabotai of Perek Yud Mishnah Vav. We continue now with Perek Yud Aleph Mishnah Aleph. The Mishnah states several laws that apply after a man dies, leaving orphans and a widow. Almana nizonet min nichsei tomim. A widow is supported from the property of her husband's orphans. The heirs of the deceased must pay for his widow's food and other needs until she collects her ketubah or remarries, as we learned in chapter 4, Mishnah 12. Ma'aseh yadeh sheren, and in return her work belongs to them, meaning they are entitled to the money she earns from her work, and she must do some basic household tasks for them. In exchange for supporting his wife, the husband is entitled to the money she earns and to certain household tasks, like we learned in chapter 4, Mishnah 4, and chapter 5, Mishnah 5. So his heirs have the same rights as long as they are supporting her, as the Gemara explains on page 96a in Masechet Ketubot and Rashi's commentary there. Ven chayvin bikvurata. However, they are not required to take care of her burial when she dies, because that is the responsibility of whoever inherits her ketubah, and the husband's heirs do not inherit her ketubah. Although the husband himself must pay for his wife's burial, this is in exchange for his right to inherit her property when she dies, like we learned earlier in chapter 4, Mishnah 4. Therefore, in our Mishnah's case, where the husband died first, and therefore neither he nor his heirs inherit her, they do not need to attend to her burial. Instead, her heirs, who are the ones who inherit her ketubah, are required to take care of her burial. And that is the Nabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.